Hey, hey. I am Christi. If you don't know me, I'm really excited to be following up. We're in a Job series, and that song is absolutely my prayer for someone here tonight that needs to just lay it down and surrender. Because last week, we knocked off the Job series with Coach Witten, and he was talking about his addiction, but he was talking about the power of friends and the people who stepped along his path to speak life into him. And we kicked it off, good friends in times of trouble. In Job 1, when it opens up, Job is a book in the first part of the Old Testament. The Bible's in two parts. And the story of Job, the book of Job, is about the story of a guy named Job. And at about verse 3, it starts talking about, verse 11, starts talking about three friends that Job has. And these friends heard all about his troubles that had come upon him, and they set out from their homes and met together, and they agreed to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. And when they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep aloud. They tore their robes, sprinkled dust on their heads, some stuff that was part of culture, bearing burdens kind of stuff. They sat on the ground with him for 7 days and nights. No one said a word because they saw how great his suffering was. And that was kind of the verse before they jumped in to Coach Winton's testimony. And I want to look at friends in times of trouble. I just want to point out a few things. They showed up. I am a firm believer in the ministry of presence. Sometimes you just got to show up. Christina's God wink shared about the lie that you're alone. You got to battle it alone. There's this other verse in the Bible that says the enemy comes to kill, steal, and destroy. And it says that he's like a lion prowling. Have you ever watched a National Geographic video? They're not getting the prey that's in the crowd. They're getting the weak one that's isolated. And I want you to think about that, because we also see, we didn't kind of hit this. We go on a few verses later, and they show up. They waited and sat with him for 7 days and nights. No one said a word to him because they saw how great his suffering was. They waited for him to speak. They didn't show up telling him how he needs to, suck it up. It's going to be okay. And I'm not saying that some of those words are wrong or bad, but sometimes we don't have the answers. And I find more often than not that trying to find the answers, we say things that can be really unhelpful at times. So I just want you to notice in this example that they waited to speak. I just kind of love that. And then we see in verse 20 and 22, it says, at this time, Job got up, tore his robe, shaved his head, and then he fell onto the ground in worship. He said a couple of really cool things, but I want to back up because we started and kicked it off with friends, but we didn't even really talk about what was going down with Job. So Job was a really faithful man. He was a stellar Christian. He really was. He was living it. He was not a man of the culture of his days. And so as the Bible reads, Satan's he's called the great accuser in the Bible. He's telling God, I bet if you allow me, it's a broken, fallen world, guys. Genesis had already happened, sin's in the world. If you allow me to mess with Job, and I want you to get that, nothing happens that God doesn't allow. And that's like a twofold cord thing. We could be like, dang, I know God allowed this, and that's hard because there's some crappy things that we go through. But you can also trust that God allowed it. And we're going to see his faithfulness in this story. And Satan goes and he's like, okay, all right, and you're going to see he's going to remain and he's going to be faithful. And so what happens up to this point before the friends step in is He takes out his servants. He takes out his livestock, so like his wealthiness, and all of his family dies. And I know that's like, and hold on, there'll be some cool things at the end. But that's hard. That's hard. We read it in a story, but I mean, sometimes I've just had like my parents die, and I feel sometimes like everyone I love dies. Right? Like I get those ants, what I call automatic negative thoughts of the people I love are gonna leave. Can you imagine losing everybody? And so that's where Job is when the friends step in. And let's keep going. At this, he got up. Oh, two really, really cool things that come out of this verse. I just like some of these really cool verses. Verse 121 says, he's still kind of strong in this. He's still solid. Says, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will go. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. May the name of the Lord be praised. And then there's verse 22. In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. So we notice he did not sin. And there's something really particular about that verse in 22. It says in verse 22, it says he did not sin by blaming God. And it's just easy to do, right? When hard things come, it's easy to blame God. And he's big enough, he can handle it. But the Bible right here says that's not the reaction that God would desire of us in that. But it says he didn't sin by blaming God, and he praised him through his pain. The second thing I want to say of those cool verses is not only does he have his friends, and at this time they're good. It kind of shifts in just a short time. But right now they're good. But then he's got his wife. And I feel like she gets a bad rap. I mean, her kids just died. That's tough. And she's grieving. And in that grief, she says some stuff, as anybody would do, but I would definitely see most of us women have some things to say when we're in our feelings. Verse 122, she says, are you still maintaining your integrity? Just curse God and die. She was done. And he says, you're talking like a foolish woman. And this is one of those others. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? Can we only have the salad bar faith? I want a little blessings and benefits, but that costly obedience, that gets to stay there, right? Do we only accept the good and not the bad? But then there's a round two. And here's what I want you to notice about when, I really like some purple and white. I mean, if we bleed purple here, but that's not a great color up there. I could have thought through that a little better. Sorry, guys. We go on. It starts layering. And that's what I really find. If y'all don't know, I'm also a therapist. I say that's my Batman job. That's my, pastor, minister by day and therapist by night. So that's what I find happens, right? It gets layered on. And someone will come in at the end of their self. And they're just ready to get it out. I mean, they're broken. And when they get it out, I say, man, there's just a lot going on. It's layered, and it doesn't have to happen in a short amount of time. And we'll unpack that a bit. But when you let things pile up within you for so long, you get to this point that we're about to see with Job. So there's a round two. Satan goes back because he didn't curse God. He prays through the pain. And he's like, let me at him again, but this time, let me actually touch him. And disease, sickness, just like death, because of the garden, is a part of this world. And it's allowed. And now he has a disease that has boils from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. And he's in bad shape. And he's hurting. The troubles pile on, and we see, starting in about chapter 2 through 4, some deep things. It continues pretty strong through 17, but we see a physical struggle. He's sick, he's hurting, he's in pain. He talks about ending his life. He doesn't want to do it anymore. And when I was sitting where you were, my piled things came to the front where I didn't want to put on the mask anymore. I didn't want to deal with everything. I didn't want to be perfect in my reactions. I had a lot of undealt with stuff. And I was where y'all are when it all started coming out. And my plates couldn't keep spinning anymore. It was mostly because of my choices, because I couldn't keep up with school and be in a sorority and go to the bar and my church things. Let's just be real, right? It wasn't who God called me to be, and I couldn't live with both feet in the world. And it, for me, and we see this for Job, wasn't necessarily that I wanted to end my life, but I wanted to be out of pain. I wanted to stop hurting and dealing with the same cycles that were stealing my joy and killing my hope. And we see that in Job, and he's grieving. He's had loss. So as the chapters go on in Job, from 4 till about 17, when we really see the depression turn to suicide, we see his friends. And it is just those chapters, if you read through it, I mean, it'll wear you out. I've read through it a couple times in the last few days. I mean, just back and forth with nonsense. And so sometimes they would say some good things. A lot of time they would say some very legalistic, accusing things. I, in 25 years of ministry, have been with people in points of pain you couldn't imagine. And the most hurtful things were when people would say things like, if you just had enough faith. I sat with a mother whose daughter had cancer and then had gone blind through the chemo. And other people were coming in their life and saying, well, if you really had faith, what do you have going on in your life that your prayers aren't affected? And I want you to hear that, because there might be one person in here that's had some of those things told to them through maybe a religious experience, right? Well, if you just had enough faith, you wouldn't be going through this. Or what did you do to cause this? Or maybe it's just those internal messages and self-doubt. And I don't know if it was all of the above for Job as we see it, but we see it. 29, chapter 29, Job continues in his discourse and negativity. But what I want you to notice is that he's open and honest the whole time about his feelings. He's not hiding or suppressing anything. And we as humans, do one of two things when we are going through it. We suppress, which means to push down. Problem with that is it gets real heavy to keep walking forward the more we keep pushing down. We suppress or we disassociate, which means we try to put on the mask like everything's okay and act like whatever we've been through didn't happen. And he didn't do that. He was honest and real with others and God, we'll see. The problem with disassociation is that our body knows it happened. Our mind knows it happened. Our memories know it happened. Have you ever heard a song and it takes you back to like junior high and you're like, that was my jam, right? I was in Walmart the other day, and I know I'm old, guys, but that song, hey, Mickey, you're so fine, you blow my mind, hey, Mickey, came on, and I was a cheerleader in my high school gym again. I was like, yeah. I was like, oh, I'm in Walmart. But that's how our brain works. So when we try to act like it didn't happen, and everything in us knows it did, we have a battle going on within us. And I want you to notice some things about Job in his struggle. He did not hold it in. He got it out. And God heard, and he was there the whole time. Job is real and he's raw. And notice this, it's one of my favorite things. I say it all the time. We actually sing some things like this. We sing a lot of words we don't know. We're actually claiming scripture as we sing them. So Job 23, 8 and 9. It's pretty freaking powerful. It says, if I go to the east, he's not there. If I go to the west, I don't find him. When he is at work in the north, I do not see him. When he turns to the south, I catch no glimpse of him. But he knows the way that I take. When he has tested me, I will come forth as gold. What Job is saying there is, I cannot see you, but I know you're there. But I know you're there. That's faith. And the Bible tells us some things about faith. It says things like faith of a mustard seed moves mountains. A mustard seed is a tiny, tiny seed, but it grows up a strong, huge, beautiful tree. And the Bible says faith of a mustard seed moves mountains. And if we can remember, there's a song called Waymaker. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop. We got to do more than sing it because life is hard. We got to live it because you can do hard things. Not in your own strength, because apart from him, you can do nothing. And I believe there's some person in this room that's got to really get that tonight, to surrender and make room for what only he can do. So what voices are you listening to? We see a lot of mess in the in-between chapters of friends who are blaming. I think they're hurting too. They're confused. They're trying to bear the burden and do the thing. They don't know what to say, quite obviously. What are you allowing to speak into and over you? There's a lot of chapters in between there where if you take some time, it just goes back and forth. And God is not a God of confusion. So I'm going to give you some nuggets tonight. My clients know I'm like a cliche counselor. I say some things all the time. And then I love it when they come back. I'm like, I heard your voice in my head. And here's one of those voices. Y'all get it for free. It's awesome. All feelings are not facts, and all thoughts are not truth. I'm telling you, put that in your pocket. Don't let anyone hawk it. All feelings are not facts, and all thoughts are not truth. Because when we're at the place that Job is, it's really hard to believe that. Feelings feel like they're real, and those intrusive thoughts feel like they are truth. They are what's defining me. You've got to guard your heart and mind, and I'll tell you a secret. You get to decide what gets space in your head and your heart. You get to decide what's going to hurt you and what's going to cause you to believe some things about who you are. And not everybody deserves it. Not everything deserves that space. The space in your head and heart is valuable. It is worth something, and we give it away to people we don't even really care about. We give it away to culture and lies that don't even know you and the plans that God has for you. Friends that might be more like acquaintances and peers because we're desperate to be accepted, but they aren't a friend that sticks closer than a brother, and iron sharpeneth iron. They're just noise. Or we'll listen to social media and compare ourselves and what we're going through to somebody else. Think about it. And finally, we get to Job, verse 31. And we start seeing that I don't deserve this. And there's something really pivotal during trials, troubles, tribulation, about the victim, about this isn't fair, and I do not deserve to be going through this. But I will say this, there's some gold that starts in 31. In Job chapter 31, verse 1, this is just a good verse to have. It's one of those like, yeah. So he literally starts off with thinking about, I'm good. I mean, I am really good. So why am I going through it like this? And it's, I made a covenant with my eyes. And I don't know, in my head, it reads like I made a covenant with my eyes. Like he's like telling it. It's in parentheses. This is Job's voice here. Not to look lustfully at a young woman. And so if some of y'all need that, because it can be a young man too, that's a good verse. I make a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully at a man or a woman. So that includes porn, right? For what is our lot from God above and our heritage from the Almighty One? And all that means is because I got a legacy. I got some things I'm sowing right now, but it's a really good verse. So that's what he starts with. And then, man, that whole next chapter, he just goes on and on and on about how good he is and how much he doesn't deserve what he's going through. We start justifying our righteousness. We are right in the situation. So in verse 32, his friends just stop. I mean, it just says like, there's nothing we can tell him anymore. They couldn't tell him anything. But then the youngest one that through all these chapters of the friends that hasn't said a word, he now breaks his silence. His name is spelled Elihu, Elihu. And he says, I've been silent until now. And he's courageous enough to be a truth teller. And I don't know how and why everything plays out the way that it does in Job, but I'll tell you this. Job got to a bad place. Now he's in a hard place. His friends are just being crazy. And then he gets a truth teller that chooses not to be silent. And then and only then when he said his piece and he spits some good truth about the character of God, about who God is, and what he can believe about the situation. Some good wisdom. And after that, in chapter 38, verse 4, God speaks. And so what I want you to notice is God was there in the beginning when Job recognized, I can't see you, but I know that you're there. And after I've been tested, I'm going to believe that this is going to mean something for myself in my life. Sunday night, was anyone here at the night of praise and prayer? Awesome. Jake, helping lead, he's a dad. I asked him to share his verse that's been carrying him through seeing his 2-year-old go through surgery and some health problems. And the verse that he chose was out of James. It's James 1, and it says, when I face, not if, when I face trials and tribulations, when I face troubles of many kinds, I'm going to count it joy. That's crazy, right? I'm going to count it joy because I know when it's all over and I'll be tested and proved, God's going to have done something with it. And I want you to hold on to that because we see when God starts talking, whoo, and God was big enough to handle all of Job's stuff, but this is good. It says in verse 38, I'll just start with verse 1, but I'll jump to verse 4 because I really like it. Then the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm. Where was God? Sounds like he was in the storm with him, right? If he spoke to Job out of the storm, he was in there with him. There's this another story. If you're a VeggieTales person, Shadrach and Benny, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they are not going to lose their faith in times of trials and tribulation. They get thrown into a fire, but they're not burned up. And that's 3 guys. And when people looked in the fire, there were 4. Because God was in it with them. And he says in verse 4, where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? I'm just like, okay, God. He said, tell me, help me to understand this. And I'm telling you, God just keeps on. Who marked off these dimensions? Surely you know. I mean, I know that God has an attitude. I mean, because this is good stuff. I mean, if I'm lying, I'm dying. It's right here in the Bible, y'all. Okay, and I am dying a little bit each day, but I know where I'm going. All right. God just keeps on. Who stretched a measuring line across the world? Or what were its footing set at? Who laid its cornerstones? Those morning stars that sang together and the angels shouted for joy. There's all these question marks. Like, you got the answers for all that? God is so good. I mean, he put him in his place. And it took that. And then we see there's a shift. And in Job 40, verse 4, he speaks again, and it's different. And tonight, God wants your narrative, if you're going through some stuff, to shift. He said, I'm unworthy. How can I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth. There was humility, repentance, ownership, and responsibility. His attitude had changed. And I want y'all to notice something about Job's relationship with God. And I hope noticing it tonight, maybe you can notice something about your relationship with God. He wasn't afraid to ask questions. In those in-between chapters, there were some hard questions of, why am I going through this? How long is life going to be like this? Why did this happen to me? And there were shifts. You know, for Job, it said he was a righteous man, living in a righteous way. And I don't know about you, but for me, there's a lot that I can own. Maybe Job didn't have that. I mean, I'm assuming he's not perfect. He wasn't Jesus. But a lot of times, Satan as the great accuser, there's a lot of guilt and shame in that narrative for me. Well, I guess I'm not worthy anymore. And I don't know if God can use me. I don't even want to do this anymore. Am I on the right path? Is what you have for me? It's hard. You called me to this? And he knows who he is. We already saw those spurts of, I know who I am. He knows who God is, but because he ultimately, through his feelings and hardships, knows who God is, he knows who he is. And it might have came out all wrong in trying to justify his righteousness through his rage and his pain, but he knew who he was and how he wanted to live. And he was reminding himself of that in the journey. And last, nothing is for nothing, because this is another one of my favorites out of Job. In Job 42, 5, but I'm going to start in 2 for you. It says, I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted. You asked, who is it that obscures my plans without knowledge? Surely I spoke of things I did not understand. God, I just can't see what you're doing. And here's the gold. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes had seen you. I'd heard about you before, but now my eyes have seen you. And Job was a godly man, but potentially, possibly, without going through what he had to go through, he would not have known God the way that he knew him afterwards. He said, I'd heard about you before, but now I've seen you. And if you can see God in the darkest times, if you can see light in the darkness, it's a different kind of light. Light on light, I mean, it's cool. But if you were here the other night at Sunday night when all the lights were off and there was just some lights in the middle, is a little different. Light in the darkness is different. And I wonder tonight if there's someone here who's heard about God before. Maybe you're going, Steph, can't see him. But maybe you need to see God in a different way through things. And what does that tell me? That tomorrow is not going to look like today. There's another side of it. When I was where y'all were at Tarleton, and I just didn't ever know if I was going to be who God created me to be, if I was going to live without constantly wavering back and forth in my faith. When my daughter just a few years ago would stand on this stage doing the same thing. I don't know, I know I didn't think that my tomorrow was going to look like today, but here's what I do know. Satan wanted to keep me from standing here and sharing with y'all. If I would have believed that lie when I was where y'all were, my daughter from Haiti wouldn't have a mama. My son from Mississippi wouldn't have a mama. My other kids that I fostered and the one that I gave birth to, if the scar that I have on my wrist would have succeeded, I don't know. So tonight, I want to give you the ending because tomorrow won't look like today. Nothing is for nothing. There is purpose to your pain. Job was faithful, and it was hard. We saw that. And Job 42:10 says, and then God kind of rebuked his friends too. Not kind of, he did. He's back, and after Job prayed for his friends, the Lord restored his fortunes, and he gave him twice as much as he had before. I remember one night at a Delta Chi party, I was already in a bad GPA, and I shouldn't have gone, and I shouldn't have been there. And I know there's some sitting here tonight that think that it's just accountability and us holding them up to a standard, and it is, but it's because we've been there. Maybe not John, he's like a Smurf, he's like near perfect. But for me, just trying to keep you from where I was. But I could not see today. And I was really, really so convicted, which is only how I knew I was actually saved. If you're sitting here thinking that's my life and there's no conviction with it, you need Jesus. I know I had him because I felt him, and it didn't feel good at the time. I couldn't see the blessings that were ahead of me. He was blessed with twice as much as he had before. And remember how I told you that I was going to tell you this secret about his kids? It's really cool. It goes on to say he was blessed with twice as much fortunes, and his brothers and sisters and everyone who had known him before came and ate with him in his house. They comforted him, consoled him over all the trouble that the Lord had allowed on him. And each one of them gave him a piece of silver and gold rings. He got some good community around him. Christina testified to that. Verse 12, the Lord blessed the latter part of Job's life more than the former part. God is not so concerned about where you came from, but where you're going. And he had 4,000 sheep and 6,000 camels, and all the numbers are doubled till we get to verse 13. Does anyone know how many kids Job had that died? He had 10. And God doubled all the blessings by number. But in verse 13, And he also had 7 more sons and 3 more daughters. He only got 10 kids back. Why do you think it is? If he doubled everything else but only gave him 10 kids. I think those other 10 kids are waiting for him in glory. This is Old Testament, so Israelites, God's chosen people, it was a whole different thing than Jesus coming to redeem and restore and the salvation through Christ and his sacrifice. But I think the first 10 were waiting for him. He still had his kids because of his faith. And I pray that tonight, some of your faith will be challenged. You'll walk into the blessing that God has for you. You'll surrender things that maybe you need to surrender. You'll get another picture of mental health. You're gonna take that. You're gonna do the thing. Oh, I think these were supposed to be this way. We see mental health in Job. And this is something I don't always get to say in my office as a therapist. I can give you a lot of tools, but at the end of the day, the battle in Job's mind, through the hard things, he just had to remind himself of God's faithfulness. He had to go through it. He got it out. He didn't hold on to it. He didn't think he could do it alone. And Jesus was his hope at the end. And I think that is my favorite message. And Todd Whitten's testimony made me think, I don't need to give them all the tools I could about mental health and being in a bad place through the story of Job. I just need to give him Jesus. Because Todd sat up here and said, it's really cool that I got sober, but the coolest part of that story is Jesus. Thank y'all for being here tonight. I can't wait to continue to go through Job. As we finish up with some worship, there's a prayer team that will talk to you privately in the connections room, that will pray with you right up here. I don't want you to leave the same way. Not any of us. So as God speaks to your heart, as I pray over you and we worship, just feel free to do whatever you need to do in these next few minutes before we all head out of here. God, thank you for your word.